Thank you, Richard. Well, if I wasn't nervous 2 hours ago, hearing from the person with the most difficult job on the planet saying that this was the most difficult thing that they'd ever done, I'm really nervous now. But I'm nervous for a couple of reasons. One is that introduction, Christiana, and your wonderful presentation in Canada. The second is I'm the only thing that stands between you and a drink, so I'm going to try and be brief. But Deputy Mayor, the reason I'm really nervous is you may have gathered from my accent, I'm British, and if at 10 o'clock tonight we vote for Brexit, I'll be claiming asylum in the morning, I think, and staying here. The talk I have is a little bit unusual. I guess all TED Talks are just a little bit unusual. The ones that we heard from the photographers and that wonderful one on recycling alongside yours, Christiana, they've been really unusual and inspiring. The idea I had here is something for nothing. Could we have the first slide, please? And I don't believe in the concept of something for nothing. I think, Christiana, from your talk, the 14-minute talk that you gave in Toronto, decades of work in Costa Rica, decades of work at the UN, decades of work fighting for the Paris Climate Agreement in December went into it. But in those 14 minutes, I got a lot. So I got, I think, something for nothing. There's an anecdote I'd like to start with. It's a famous anecdote. This is my version of it. This is how I don't actually agree with the idea of something for nothing. Picasso is sitting in a cafe in France, in Paris, and a cafe goer sees him and asks him to scribble a sketch for him on a napkin, which he does. It takes him a couple of minutes. He scribbles a sketch, he hands it over to the person, and the person says, "I'd like to give you something for that, Mr. Picasso." And he says, "Okay, that'll be $2 million. And he said, $2 million? That was 2 minutes' work. And he says, "No, my dear, that was a lifetime's work." And I'd say, so I don't believe in this concept fully. I believe in its principle, though. Now, my first something for nothing personal anecdote is based on when I first left university and I had no money. The only thing I owned, the only thing I possessed was a stereo, the old stereos, the ones with valves in them. I had nowhere to put it, though. My brother, a designer, came up with this idea. He said that, could we have the next slide, please? This, a rice pudding can. You get a rice pudding can, you buy 8 of them. He had 2 sheets of glass, and he created the most fantastic, modernist, wonderful piece of art for this stereo that I then had in my living room. And it sort of helped the heat from the valve amp. It was just a perfect piece of art. And I would have wanted to show you today, but I did actually eat the rice in the cans at the end of using it as a shelving unit. And I was going to show you a slide of the dinner party I had eating that rice, but then someone told me yesterday no one wants to see a big adult eat a can of rice, so this is the slide I've got of my son. Next slide, please, who ate something not dissimilar. The first idea, the way in which I actually implemented or tried to influence this something for nothing idea in my own life was when I was traveling in East Africa about 5 years ago. I had 4 hours to kill before I was going to get an aeroplane, and I thought I'd really like to do something for this country. I'd like to reinvest back into its social fabrics. I'd like to do something. I'd like to give something. I've got these 4 hours to kill. I'd like to do something interesting. And I tried to search charities. I tried to search for other organizations that I could go and help in. I've got a few skill sets. I speak English. I can perhaps do a bit of teaching. I could perhaps do some translation. But there was nowhere. There's no central repository of someone who's got a skill set. It could be accountancy. It could be drawing. It could be an engineer. There's no central repository of anything anywhere in the world that will tell you what you can do with those hours to kill if you are somewhere and you have some energy to reinvest back into the country you're visiting. So I came up with an idea with a friend of mine, Tom Burnett, and the idea is this. Next slide, please. It's called Waiting for a Cab. And Waiting for a Cab maps the entire world. And we spent hours and hours after work every evening trying to populate this site. calling up people in Ethiopia, calling up people in Vanuatu, in Kiribati, in all of these places and say, as a charity, is there something you'd like someone to help with? And what you do, next slide please, is you simply click on a continent. After you've clicked on the continent, you click on the country you want to go to. Next slide please. After you've clicked on the country you want to go to, you then have a whole stack of charities that you can go to. They tell you what they want. And it may be a stack of pens, it may be a lesson in English, it may be anything. It's something normally really simple. It may be them wanting you to empty your pockets of your non-convertible currency and just leaving it there with them, or just spending a couple of hours there. So if you click on the next slide, which you can't, by the way, you will come to a charity page telling you all of that information. And that's the idea, that's the concept behind waiting for a cab. Now, this is something for nothing because it costs the charities nothing. This is all done in our spare time. It costs the person that's searching for this information nothing. It's maintained by ourselves in our spare time and in our weekends. And that's the principle, and it kind of works. It's a really well-visited charity. It's not charity, it's a really well-visited site, and it has that information that anybody traveling anywhere, even someone traveling to Bonn, can click on the Bonn website and they can do something. They can reinvest back into the country they're in at the moment. Which brings me back to the principal idea. You spoke very kindly of the post-Ebola summit that we launched at the UN in New York and then actually executed in the UK earlier this year. This is one of the things that my company does. We host investment summits for the poorest countries in the world. And when we started the company, I had three partners. I had Leon, who's my principal partner, and Chris and John, and we sat around the table, and I said, I'd like to create an organization that can host these investment summits, get structured, sustainable investment into the poorest economies on the planet. There's one catch. I don't want to ask those governments for any money. Now, this conference here today, Richard, this can cost many hundreds of thousands of pounds, but I was determined not to take a single penny from poor governments. But I did want to encourage investment into those governments. I was also determined to make it, as you have done for your TEDx conference here today, I wanted to make it free at the point of the delegates going to the conference. So we developed this business model. It's become a robust business model. We've been in business for over a decade. We've had, can we have the next slide, please? We've had over 300 heads of state and cabinet ministers. We've generated over $12 billion worth of new, sustainable, fresh investment into emerging market economies. And we've created a fantastic business model which is supported entirely, exclusively by the private sector. So they pay for these events, the big sponsors of the events. And that's how we've created this. And that is my something for nothing. Thank you.